I've come to a conclusion that it really doesn't matter what film you use. I used to buy all kind of exotic films and get excited about their characteristics. One promising more grain, the other one promising more contrast and whatnot. But then I noticed that different films don't really make any difference in the final product. Now, I don't like this conclusion, and chances are that I'm totally wrong with this. So please feel free to disagree with me and maybe put comments down there and hit the subscribe. I would appreciate that. Let's look at photography. Let's look at the process as a whole. So it starts with you taking the picture. You select the camera, you go to the location, to the studio, you set the environment right if you have a control over the environment. You compose the picture, you set the aperture and the time, and you take the picture. The quality of the lens, your settings, your composition, they all have a huge impact on the picture that you just took. The picture is then stored on the film that was inside of your camera. Then after taking the picture, after it's stored on the film, you go and develop your film. You select the developer. Developers are vastly different and you can use them in a different way. You can select Rodinal, to my knowledge the oldest photography product still being sold, and use it in a very different ways. You can use it as a 1+25 mix, or you can do a very mild 1+100 mix and develop using stand development. Rodinal, especially with stand development, creates a very visible and strong grain, or instead of a Rodinal, you can choose a very modern developer like Xtol that minimizes the grain and gives you a very smooth picture. Or you can be more exotic and select some of these more exotic developers, whatever you want to experiment. And the same goes with color developers. There's plenty of products available and you can use them in different temperatures. You can push and pull and get totally different kind of results in your color process. After you develop the film, you go to the post-processing phase. If your process is digital, you either use a scanner or a digital camera to scan your negatives. That scanning process has a big impact on how the pictures will look in the digital domain. Then you have your favorite application, whether that's a Lightroom or something else, and you have an endless amount of adjustments you can make to the picture. You can change the contrast, you can change the lighting, you can add vignetting, you can emphasize certain parts of the picture, you can bring out the lights, you can do all kind of things. Now, I know some people go too far with that, but that's another matter. The possibilities are limitless. Or after you develop the picture, you may go to an analog phase and go and print your pictures in a darkroom. Now there, the possibilities are once again almost limitless. First, you choose which kind of paper you want to use. You select the brand of the paper, and even more importantly, you select if you want to use resin-coated paper or fiber-based paper. They have very different look and feel in the end results. And then you select if your paper is fixed or variable contrast paper. If it's fixed, you can select a very contrasty paper or less contrasty. If it's a variable, then you can use filters to choose your contrast. There's an endless amount of combinations with these filters, how you can select and work with your contrast. You can do split printing, where you use two different contrasts on one single picture. Or you can make different parts of the picture having different contrast than the other parts. So then, to illustrate my argument that film has very little to do with the final product, let's divide this process into 4 phases. Let's talk about the camera and everything that has to do with the work that you do with the camera. Then let's talk about the film, the development, and then I put post-processing into one bucket. So let's talk about the post-processing as one. And there's so much engineering in me that I wanted to create a spreadsheet about these aspects. No, actually, it is easier for me to to explain if I visualize this on a spreadsheet. So we have the camera, the film, development, and then post. Within these phases, let's look at 7 different aspects of your picture. Now, this is not scientific and this is not all inclusive. I just made this up, but it allows me to talk about the different aspects of photography. Now, there may be something missing and all of these aspects are not equal, but bear with me. So I want to talk about composition, exposure, depth of field and sharpness, contrast, grain, vignetting, and then color balance and tone. I think this is a fairly good list of the characteristics of your picture and different aspects that you want to control in photography. And let's start with the composition. The composition is mostly done with your camera. There's a little bit of composition left for the post. You can crop your picture, you can frame it, but the majority of the work is of course done while you're taking the picture. Then we talk about the exposure. Once again, camera is the most important element to control the exposure when you select the time and you select the aperture. But also the post have a huge impact. The final brightness, darkness of your picture will be selected in post. You have more control in the post about different parts of the picture. You can emphasize and de-emphasize, letting more light into one area, less light into another area. So which one is more important? A bit hard to tell. Moving on, depth of field, sharpness. Everything to do with the camera. You can't really change sharpness or depth of field in any other phase of your workflow. Then the contrast. It has very little to do with the camera. I mean, the lens type and the contrast of the lens has a little bit significance to the contrast, but it is mostly an effect of the selected film, developer, and post. Then grain. Camera has almost nothing to do with the grain. The selected film, development, what developer you use and how you use it has a huge impact on the kind of the grain you are going to get, and even post has some significance to the grain. Vignetting. Some cameras have a very strong vignetting, but some have almost none. In any case, at least I manage most of the vignetting in post. I add it, or in some cases I even try to reduce the vignetting in post. And both in an analog workflow and in a digital workflow, managing your vignetting is possible in the post phase. Last but not least, if you are taking color pictures, you need to control your color balance and your tone. Now once again, the camera has some significance in your color balance and in your tone, depending on the coding of the lens. But compared to the selected film, the developer and how you use it, and post, once again, these later phases have much more importance. Let's go one step further and have the courage to simplify even more. Let's look at these 4 phases and these 7 different aspects of photography and dare to say what is the most important phase for any particular characteristics. And as I said, I'm just trying to make a point here. I'm trying to help you to understand what I think, and I may be totally wrong with this, even though I don't think that I am. So the composition, the camera is the most important. Exposure, once again, the camera is most important. Depth of field, sharpness, camera is the most important. Contrast. I would say that the post is by far the most important. Selecting the different filters or working with your digital workflow, that's where you have a full control on the contrast, even to the extent that different parts of your picture may have different contrast. Then grain, a film has an impact on a grain. But I would almost say that the way you develop, pushing, pulling, stand development, and using and selecting a certain developer has even bigger impact on the grain than the film selected. But I didn't dare to say it aloud, so I put 2 crosses there. So it's equally divided between the film and the developer. Vignetting, most important phase is the post, and then color, balance, and tone. Now I know some people don't like this, but I claim that it has very little to do with the film and it has all to do with the post. you select the tone and the color balance and the look and feel of your color image in post. Okay, enough about the spreadsheets. Let me show you real examples to illustrate my opinion. Here are some test pictures that I worked on in my darkroom. These pictures are from the same negative, and I wanted to create a certain look and feel. And if you look at these three different pictures, how I worked with a contrast, these are very different. All from the same film, just using different contrasts. Or then look at these four images. Once again, taken from the same negative, just using the contrast in the post. And then look at these two different pictures side by side. Very different look and feel, all the differences managed in post. Then what about the grain? This is a little bit more difficult to explain because showing grain on a YouTube video is kind of an uphill battle, but let me try. Oh, here are two pictures, both taken with the same camera on Ilford HP5 Plus film. The one over here developed with Rodinal 1+25 mix. One over here developed with Xtol. Xtol gives very fine grain, Rodinal much more grain. If you look at the pictures, there is a difference in the grain, but it's not because of the film that I used, but it's because the way I used the developer. Now what about then the color pictures? Well, this picture was originally taken with Kodak Portra 400, and I can make it look like Kodak Portra, and I can make it look like Ektar, or I can make it look like Lomography 800, all in post. I mean, I got all the possibilities to change this in the post. I can even take 30 years old color film with broken colors and all that and fix it in post. Has very little to do with the film. So let's wrap this up. And sorry for being such a party pooper. My claim is that at least in my photography, the selection of a particular film has very little impact. The selection of tools, materials and the ways of working in all the other parts of my photography are so much more important than any particular film. So there are a few things that I consider important in selecting the film. I think the film should be flexible. I like to be able to push and pull it really hard so I can use it in different lighting conditions. Also, if I want to shoot color film, I gotta have a color film. And then I want to shoot a film with least amount of contrast. That allows me to manage the contrast downstream. If I have a very contrasty film, it is not possible to reduce it in post. And that is a funny thing. I used to love contrasty films, and they certainly look better coming out from the scanner or doing the first prints in the darkroom. Or when you work with your contrast tools, either analog or digital, the less you have contrast, the more you have flexibility. Flexibility to lighting conditions, least amount of contrast, cost efficient, that's being a cheap film. Those are the things that I look in a film. And that is especially true in a large format or bigger negative size. In a regular 35mm, you may sometimes struggle with grain. For me, that is not an issue because I shoot mostly with a medium format and larger, but I claim that my statement of film being the less important aspect also applies for 35mm film. There are only two exceptions that I have found in my workflow. I need to choose an Ilford Delta 3300 for these kind of pictures. You may consider this not really a mainstream photography, but I like this look and feel. And I can only get it with Ilford Delta 3200 and pushing it to 12,000 and beyond. The other film that has unique characteristics is a Sinister 800 color film. For night photography, it creates little red circles around artificial light sources, and I just love it. Yeah, it's a little bit of a gimmick, but this is an ideal Christmas film. So, what am I saying then in the end? Am I saying that it really doesn't matter which film you use and you shouldn't get excited about exotic films? No. All I'm saying is that film seems to have much less significance than I originally thought. And in most of my photography, it has almost no difference what film I choose. But there are these certain occasions where a specific film gives you this extra oomph, this extra leverage. Trying a different film may be good for inspirational reasons, and I believe there is still room for radically different, radically new films. As I said, to me, Ilford Delta 3200 is a radically different film when pushed really hard. And another radically different film is a boutique film called Santa 1000, black and white film. It is an exciting, highly contrast, crystal clear film. You can create a transparent, almost a metallic look and feel on your film. So for these extremes, film has an impact. But for the majority of my work, it doesn't mean anything. Now, what do you think? Would you agree with me?